Good to see everybody out there again for another wonderful episode of This Week in Drones, streaming to you live here every Thursday, 1 p.m. Eastern. Deep diving conversations around the drone industry, drones for good, and then also the drone threat and what we're allowed to do about it and what's coming out in legislation and such. And I want to invite a good friend, Travis Moran with SERC, who is a regulator for the electric industry covering the Southeast region. So he knows a lot about this world, what's new, what's coming, and what the reality is there. And then, of course, Michelle Duquette with 3 Mad Air, aviation expert, decades in the industry. She just brings a ton of knowledge about how the airspace works as we try to play around with drones and do our thing with them in the airspace. She helps us to go, okay, how does that fit into the actual framework? How do we do a good job integrating them? I'm curious how drones are perceived right now amongst electric utilities and the leadership within those utilities. Are they widely being embraced as a tool for good, for inspections, for the other things I have been seeing, or are they more widely being seen as a threat, as a risk? And I don't know, what have you seen in that trend?
So there are two pieces to what you're asking. There's the operational piece and there's the security piece. From the operational piece in energy, everything is seen through the prism of cost, right? Can drones reduce cost of doing certain activities? And also, can they increase safety? Because safety at electric utilities and iron gas and also the others, oil, is paramount because they don't want OSHA, right? They don't want that problem. Safety is huge. So any task that you can automate in that way is something that they look very favorably upon. That's on the operational side. So inspections, being able to fly the lines, automation, hopefully more so. We've got some DVLOS authorizations that have happened with some of the utilities, so that's good stuff. So that's the operational side. They're looked on very positively, and especially as prices have come down on them and reliability has gone up. Still have the supply chain issues with regard to the Defense Authorization Act and those kinds of things, but air gapping and stuff will apply. On the security side of the house, it's more complex. Security, again, is not a revenue-generating entity within the enterprise. So it's very disparate. Some utilities, depending upon how the executive team and security team look at them, as huge threats. Others see them as okay, so what? We have all these other problems and issues, and we recover from hurricanes, which we deal with in my region a lot, and we recover within days. So that it just depends, right? There's no unified opinion on them. We have, as an industry, recognized them as a threat and included that, what you saw in our course, in what's called our design basis threat. So that if you're getting audited, they're going to ask you, what do you do about drones at this point in time? And it could be as simple as saying, as I have an awareness and a reporting campaign. It could be as complex as saying, I'm going to buy detection technology. And it's all in between. So it is really a very disparate view on the security side.
So I think that how you just characterize this, Travis, is something that anyone in any other sector could also say. We know that there is a concern, whether it's across drones or solar panels or the electronics within medical devices, within our cell phones, within televisions, whatever it is. We recognize that. But the utility company, the energy sector specifically, your vulnerabilities are really high up there on the list of things that we all should be concerned about. So what I'm curious about is, in your community, are you registering as a collective that you are in fact one of the national assets that is an extreme vulnerability that has an influence on a lot of other things being able to function if you allow your vulnerability to be exploited? And
Sure. I will do my best to answer this in the most elegant and non-elongated way. There are 3 tiers to the system. There's the national tier, which contains the most sensitive substations that we have in facilities. They fall under the suite of SIP standards, and some of the lower facilities do as too. But for the physical security side, only a very small percentage do. And that's by design, because they're so critical to the health of instability in the grid, cascading events. So these critical infrastructure protection standards is a suite of them. And they're mostly cybersecurity, but there are two that pertain to physical, SIP 6 and SIP 14. SIP 14 is whereby the DBT process exists, where you will be asked as a utility if you have a facility that applies applicable to. That's a key variable. Whether or not you have considered drones as a threat, vulnerability, and then what you've done against them or to protect against them from the physical side. On the cyber side, you get into the supply chain issue, you get into the firewalls, there's so many, there's 710, there's so many of the SIP standards that apply to this that they have to be very careful with. So the industry takes all of this extremely seriously. We're one of the most regulated industries out there. Matter of fact, most of them don't have the standards we do. But even given that, the vulnerabilities that exist are myriad because of the different levels of the system. So even if you're just a very small, if you're a co-op, for example, your local cooperative, which we have where I live, those are entry points into the system. And having those firewalls, having those cybersecurity pieces. So even if they're using a drone to do something, you want to have an IDS, intrusion detection system, that's not physical, but is cyber, to be able to detect those anomalies if something's happening. And these are all things we talk about, and at different levels they're required to do. We understand probably very poignantly compared to others that the whole thing doesn't run without electricity, and that we're talking about life, safety, and health, and these life-sustaining activities. So they're extremely aware of it. The big investor owns they have their own intelligence gathering groups to try to deal with these issues, and they're trying to, even the supply chain point of where are we purchasing stuff from? Can the company certify that the chips are sourced in this particular area? Are the patch updates? Are the updates available? Do we cleanse them first before we put them even into the system? So the best I can, quick, and not to get too deep in the weeds, but that's how we look at it for sure.
Okay. Real quick, tons of comments on here. I've not been able to even keep up with it, but this one, Ed Knock posted in here. Are we concerned about compliant drones or more so the bad actors? Because that's one question, remote ID versus picking them up, or not remote ID. And then the backup to that, or the second point was, okay, well, wait, or compliant versus non-compliant. Good first step when you say passive versus active tracking. In order to prove that you need a flight restriction, you might want a sensor, whether it be remote ID or, of course, I'm biased towards radars, but, you need at least something to give you data to show that there are flights happening. But I just want to see what you guys' thoughts were on that.
So I think that is one of those gray areas that we have been applying a broad brush to, and it's just not working in the drone world. It's not like a license plate on your car where, any law enforcement can scan it and see what it is and see where you are and what your name is and all of that stuff. We want that same kind of capability for local law enforcement. And there's not really a need for you as a security agent at a substation to be able to read somebody's license plate on their car. However, we may have a need for you to be able to have some intelligence on unidentified drones that are flying over your facility. So I think, and I'm also hearing something else from you too with regard to remote ID, that it's not necessarily the remote ID function that isn't helping, although Brandon, your point of low power is well taken. And there are several remote ID service suppliers who feel the exact same way. But it's that once that query goes out and it goes through all of the checkpoints that it's got to go throughout to check all of the different databases that it needs to check in order to find whatever it is that gives you that nefarious lead, coming back to that officer on the ground is the problem. So there does need to be another layer of translation that needs to happen after all of that query and processing and fusing that comes back to that officer in a timely manner and in a meaningful, actionable way. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
That's interesting. And then Ed also threw in
100%.
Ed threw in this caveat too. Wouldn't you, as a security person, want to focus on the one that you can identify? So not necessarily run all 6 in your story, but just say one of them's not compliant.
So 2 points real fast. Never underestimate sometimes the stupidity of people. And what I'm saying is that they could be potentially completely compliant with all FAA regulations and still be doing something bad. So I have funny videos on YouTube of the world's dumbest criminals, and they're like doing a holdup in a convenience store wearing their maintenance shirt with their name on it. So just because the drone's pushing remote ID and maybe potentially compliant does not necessarily mean that they're not doing something bad, stalking and etc. And then I just want to hit on one more thing super fast on a different perspective of, are we targeting compliant versus non-compliant? And we ran into this with the DoD all the time, is removing the chaff or the density of air traffic to identify the bad people easier and faster. There's really no purpose for anybody to be flying 400 feet below over a nuclear power plant or an oil refinery. I'm sorry that, yes, this is America, but there's just really no practical reason why that needs to happen, especially given the risk if those operations were disrupted to the day-to-day civilian operation. So compliant operators will comply with that airspace restriction, which helps identify the bad actors or those who want to create harm, because they're going to violate that to try and do some harm. And so you can react faster. And that's a really important piece to distinguish between friendly and foe.
Basically, flight restrictions with 2209 over critical infrastructure would at least help to say the compliant folks are going to fly around those locations because of the flight restriction, and then people are going to ignore it and just fly right through it. Those are the 100%. People that, to Ed's question.
Really, all I wanted to do was boil all of this down to recognition that there is no all or nothing, one size fits all solution here. We talk about the layers of counter-UAS and drone mitigation for a reason. What everybody has been talking about on this particular podcast have been validating the need for various layers. We have situational awareness. Now we have some triggers, and we're going to have some prioritization of those triggers. And we're going to have some actions that are associated with those prioritized triggers. That's all good. So please don't let yourself fall into the trap of all or nothing. If we're talking about a solution that's not necessarily your passion, it doesn't mean it's not a layer. But bring your voice to the table and let's talk about your layer also.